You're listening to Scaling Impact, the #1 podcast for conscious entrepreneurs changing the world. Today on the podcast, we're bringing you another foundational knowledge episode. These episodes are designed to give entrepreneurs practical knowledge and actionable steps to scale both their business and their positive impact. In this episode, I'm joined by my co-founder of Exponential Ventures, James Wallace. Since we're both named James, I tend to go by JT and he goes by JW. JW has been an entrepreneur since he was 11 years old and has built hundreds of applications in over 25 tech startups. He built his first website in 1994 and hasn't stopped building technology since. He's an exponential technology specialist and a brilliant advisor when it comes to building exponential organizations. In this episode, we dive deeply into exponential startups. What are they? What makes them different? And why they dramatically outperform traditional companies. We look at the crucial role of data in startups and practical steps for how a founder can make use of the data they already have and probably haven't been using. We also explore the evolution of the internet from Web 1.0 to Web 3.0 and how the new gig economy is providing far more security than traditional jobs. Interesting points covered include exponential principles, the principles Google and Apple are built on, why thinking exponentially is so hard for most of us, the importance of data in a startup and how you can utilize the data you have, the past, present, and future of the internet, Web 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0, and why if the product is free, you are the product. So the thing I wanted to talk about today specifically was everything to do with exponential technologies, going exponential. What does the word exponential mean, like literally, and then also figuratively, and how do we use it? There's a lot of people that use it. It's a little overused possibly, but we think that's cool because it's a good word. So do you want to talk about just exponential? I'll just give a quick example before I jump into it, but I'm going to leverage you as a technologist that can help us understand the depth of how these things move. And then I'll try to play a bit more of a generalist that can help bring some examples or some light or help the average person figure out kind of the depth that you're bringing to it. I guess there's that example that you hear Peter Diamandis give sometimes about exponential steps. He says you take 30 steps linear, you end up 30 steps away from where you started, in the room. You take 30 exponential steps, 1, 2, 4, it just keeps growing, and you end up circling the earth completely in 30 steps. And people sometimes have a hard time getting their mind around that, because it's impossible. The human mind is not made to understand exponential. It's a math thing that we've been able to calculate on paper, but it's actually really difficult to ingrain into our mind. Now, one fun thing that you and I do is we started realizing, okay, so the last step, the 29th to the 30th step, is halfway around the earth. That's really important to note, that the first stages of exponential growth are actually pretty boring. It's 0.0001, 0.0002, 0.0004, and no one sees anything. And then all of a sudden this thing erupts like a iceberg above water, and it grows really crazy. And everyone thinks, oh wow, that was a crazy overnight success. But when you design and architect an exponential organization, this is what happens every time. And so we've gotten used to seeing those trends and seeing those in companies that are awesome that are out there, in startups that we've been working with. And I just wanted to mention a way that we've tried to incorporate into our culture at Exponential Ventures, exponential thinking. We have all these little sayings or things that we used to say 5 to 10 years. And I think we heard someone else talking to us about something. They're like, well, that might not happen for about 5 to 10 years. And we said, 5 to 6. And they kind of are like, what do you mean? And we said, well, the 6th one is the rest. So you can't say 5 to 10 when you're talking about technology or exponential growth. You have to say 5 to 6. And the person's like, whoa, that's interesting. And we just realized we do that type of thing all the time because we're trying to get our minds around this. We're trying to talk about it. With certain things like this, you just have to be more familiar with it. You can't quite ingest it. So help us understand exponential growth when it comes to technology.
Yeah, and I think what you just said there is the most important thing to accept, is that the brain does not think that way. And I don't know if that's literally genetically, biologically, but I would say for sure, in other words, nature, but absolutely nurture. We've been nurtured to think very linearly. And just as an observation too, that's why government, big corporations, consulting firms always get it wrong, especially in exponentially accelerating categories, so markets and even exponentially accelerating organizations, which I think we're going to talk about today.
And economists.
They are in that group for sure.
They can't forecast exponential movement.
In spite of what's extraordinary is in spite of year after year after year after year failing
Being wrong.
predictably on an exponential scale. Like a really good example of that was mobile phone adoption over the last, say, 10 to 15 years. Every single year, every one of those, like consulting economists and government, got it wrong. And they were able to actually look back and look at all the years that they got wrong and actually see literally an exponentially accelerating chart emerge, and still consciously, intentionally chose to predict linearly. Every single year it's the same thing. So I think the very first thing is acknowledging that we have a deficiency and being okay with that. And instead, intentionally, consciously driving forward into our brains, into our thought patterns, a pause and say, are we looking at this in exactly the way in which that product, those materials that create that product inside that market are accelerating? So, 3D printing of electric motor vehicle parts is on a probably multiples exponentially accelerating curve. So,
or you could get into biotech with printing a kidney, 3D printing a kidney using stem cells or things like that. Crazy things are happening. So let's get really practical. And I want to we have crazy theoretical things we could talk about here, but I always want to tie it to the practical, because it is very practical, but a lot of people can't see quite how. A lot of people will go to a talk about exponential technology and they come out, or the AI or something like that, and they come out almost disillusioned, like, I don't understand what's going to happen in the future. And it seems like it's going to be crazy, and I'm way behind. So let's let people feel really confident with how to use exponential growth to their advantage. I think it's where Davids that are fighting Goliath have this huge advantage of this exponential slingshot. And that's how we used to talk about exponential ventures when we were talking to new founders. They'd say, so what exactly are you doing? We'd say, well, we're giving an exponential slingshot to 1 million Davids to help them build exponential organizations. We're going to do that, in a number of different ways, and we're going to help them train in that slingshot with the ones that are in our portfolio that we're investing in, and just give away the blueprints to everyone else so that they can move forward as well. But the practical application is that 10 of these Davids, 10 founders that create solutions and scale them exponentially across the planet can make more impact right now in today's society than a multinational corporation or one of the biggest governments, or one of the governments that's tied with a lot of the other ones. So there's a real balancing, or there was a power imbalance. And when you empower the individual, you by nature disempower the central authorities or the other people that were in power before, the incumbents. So now it's to the point where the individual has more access to that power than they've ever had before. And it's still not being harnessed. Like today, I went to Greece a little while ago, 40% unemployment rate, and I talked to a number of people, and no one seemed to know that they had to get onto the online economy. And the government wasn't telling them that. Tech people weren't coming in and leading courses on that. They still didn't quite know. And I was kind of, it was a despairing moment when I realized that there's people going through such suffering without access even to the information, just to point them to a global economy online that they can enter from home with their laptop. So when we get into, Exponential Organizations is an awesome book that we love, written by Salim Ismail, and he has a formula in there, or a acronym about ideas scale, and each one represents a different thing: interfaces, dashboards, experimentation, autonomy, social for ideas, and then for scale, it's staff on demand, community and crowd, algorithms, leveraged assets, and engagement. So of those, which one do you want to talk about first? And I'd love to go deep into one.
Well, I could talk for hours about practical applications of exponential technology, because years ago I just decided that that's where I was going to apply all the time that I could find, and basically not only figuring out how to architect an exponential enterprise for myself and those around me, but how to proliferate that, how to give that out to people, blueprints and so on. Just really quickly want to back up and just acknowledge Moore's Law, which is really important to understand. And that is that, back in the 60s and out of Oracle, there was this observation that price, performance, and miniaturization was doubling every 18 months. And so Most things are on Moore's law. Anytime that something is informationalized, digitized, it naturally progresses to Moore's law. But just as an observation, many things are at multiple times Moore's law.
Right.
And the reason why
the other side of Moore's law as well is that the cost halves. So it shrinks by 50%. So not only does the performance double every 18 months, the cost halves, which creates two exponential trends. One in cost going down exponentially to have $60 million computer in your iPhone. And then you have the capability of that iPhone being way, way, way beyond what that $60 million computer could have done.
Yeah, in miniaturization, it gets smaller. So it halves in price, it doubles in performance, and it halves in miniaturization or the size as well. You're right. So everything becomes more powerful, smaller to the point where it actually evaporates. It literally disappears.
Well, things that cost money have to be free at a certain point because there's such a low cost that it's nominal.
So it's important to understand that alone, because again, it can help to retrain the brain. And I think just everyone understanding that will naturally allow that new model and mindset to become more of a typical way of thinking for them. But also to realize that the architect in exponential enterprise, to look at all these things, automation, dashboards, staff on demand, and so on, we're really looking at how do we integrate people that are proficient in leveraging those exponentially accelerating technologies. So communication, obviously, the internet and how we engage has helped us to become more efficient, to remove waste, to move faster at a lower cost. When we engage the right service providers, they're leveraging Moore's law and hopefully multiple times Moore's law. So, and just as an observation really quick, very often I'll talk to someone who is operating a business that they don't, like an agency. Let's just say an agency really quick. And one comes to mind right away, and it's a friend of ours, and was very dismissive. No, I don't have a tech company. And one of two things is true. Either they are slowly going bankrupt, or they don't realize the degree in which they leverage other people's technology. So everyone that's running a business is running a technology business. I'd say, period. If you're not adopting more and better technology to allow you to do more things with less money, you are slowly bankrupting yourself. So I think this idea that you may have a mostly manual, mostly physical business, and you're not a technology is either, it's a limiting belief, and everyone needs to accept that they're running a technology company.
And that would even come when we're talking to charities and non-government organizations, nonprofits. If they're not utilizing technology, they're not getting their solution to everyone that could for the best, for the people that are donating that money, for the best, most efficient, most effective way to deliver what they're doing.
Everyone's a technology company, and those that leverage technology more are going to win. Not necessarily there's a zero-sum game here, but they're going to protect their interests, protect their impact.
Even if it's winning against the problem that they're trying to solve.
Yeah, maybe even not against others for sure. So to your question about some practical things, I mean, I think that staff on demand is very interesting. You have some experience with that, so I'll probably leave you to that. But the information side, the dashboard, the analytics, the KPIs that go along with that, of course, the automations are very, very exciting. So removing people from manual robotic work that is typically very unfulfilling for the human, and allowing an algorithm to do that in a much more efficient way. Recently, I saw that there was 370,000 hours of legal work that was reduced to about 7 seconds of running an algorithm. And this is an example of removing just a tremendous amount of waste and allowing us to get something that's much more accurate, obviously much quicker. So,
and allowing those lawyers to have more fulfilling hours than doing something that technology can do a lot easier.
Yeah, one thing I just want to make really clear, although I don't think the audience is concerned about this as most people are in the general public, but as soon as the average person starts hearing about reduction of hours and so on, they go into a fear of job loss, of hour loss, of wage work loss. And it's our belief, as you said, that we are looking at just repositioning humans into more fulfilling work. That from society all the way down to the individual, we're much better off finding that alignment of passion, proficiency, and purpose, rather than just, hey, here's some wage work. So replacing humans, we do have a bit of a gap and we need government to get involved, but replacing manual labor with computers and algorithms and even robots to a certain degree is going to eventually facilitate more meaningful work. So it's not a threat, it's not negative, it's enabling us to have more fun in life and contribute in a wider and better way.
For sure. Well, can you go into, well, actually, here's a question. Maybe it's a little controversial. Do you think all companies are also data companies?
For now, I think the future is self-sovereign with regard to data, so that we as individuals and even as organizations are going to own our own data. We are going to engage third parties in a way that we're not transferring data to them for them to hold. We've seen a lot of abuses, and we've also seen just mistakes that have caused a lot of damage to humans. So I'd say at the moment we are, but the data game, if we want to call it that, people positioning or organizations positioning as data companies, that is going to go away. But data is very important, obviously.
And you're already into the future, the way you're thinking about that. Let's go back to the past a little bit, where companies started to realize that just the data of the activity within the company was the most valuable asset. And that was a huge realization for a number of companies. And then the whole idea of big data companies kind of started to emerge. And then it became actually the primary motivating factor for building new technologies was just to get data. And a lot of people so the idea for a lot of people, just using, social media, doing different things on your phone every day, you don't realize that you're actually giving your assets of your data, what you're interested in, what you like, what you don't, all these things, you're giving mass amounts of data to all these companies. And that's the most valuable, that's the reason they run the platform.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because there's other really cool reasons to run social media platforms, or there's lots of cool things you can use for technology. But there's a certain point where all of a sudden the whole game became just getting the data and figuring out different ways to sell it, whether it be to advertisers or to third parties. I tried to opt out of Netflix, actually. I love Netflix, and I was trying to opt out of all the ways they were selling my data one time. And I had to opt out of 117 different ways they were selling my data one at a time and go through, and it took me a few hours to go out and opt out of all these things. And I was like, who else is going to do this? I'm a nut for even thinking about it, let alone going through and doing it all. No one else is doing this. And they don't realize the second they share the movie that they love on Netflix, on Facebook, that now Netflix, the data company, and Facebook, the data company, both give each other mass amounts of data on who you are. So now they've been able to connect one identity in one platform with another identity on another platform and share just enough to help each other, but not too much that they would lose their primary assets. And then when you do that, say you share it somewhere else, and all of a sudden these companies now are identifying, oh my gosh, the person who loves these types of movies and watches 3 hours a week and does all this stuff, we have all that data on the person. But now we know that he's a male and he loves racing and like all these other things about him over here. And they get a really holistic perception of a person digitally. So people are waking up a little bit to what's going on there. But a lot of startup founders think that's almost irrelevant. It's like, listen, I have a small company. I don't have a lot of data. But the question is, how can you leverage the data that you do have? So what would you say to a startup founder that does have a lot of incoming data and they're just not utilizing it? Or even a organization like a charity or something like that has tons of information on the problem that they're solving and how they've been solving it.
Yeah. So from the idea scale thing, leveraging assets and obviously making use of that asset is really important, the information. A couple of really quick observations. Number one is all of what you said resulted in that saying that if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. Another really cool stat that's interesting, this is about 5 or 7 years old now, but that other than e-commerce, 97% of people don't understand how money is made online, like how organizations generate any profit. So all of this is really a mystery. And I think over the last couple of years, because of some major data breaches, people have become very aware of how money is being made. So it's the big data warehousing, coming back to centralization and so on, the abuse and misuse and lack of protection that's the problem. So you're right, back in today, the average startup, I think needs to really look at that it is valuable. So the digital advertising, digital marketing worlds really understand the value of everything. They understand. So let's just say, and again, just to be clear, the self-sovereign world in the future, the world where everyone owns their own data, it's still going to be as important that startups recognize how valuable that is. So it's basically the individual owns the data, and then on a permission basis gives one bit of permission to that organization as they build trust to get a very specific value back and be able to revoke those permissions very quickly. I think that's the future. Even then, startups are going to need to understand the value of that thing. So a digital advertising, digital marketing company, for example, just to give very practical kind of format or framework that people can understand, they'd say, let's create an avatar, Bill Smith. Inside of Bill Smith, Bill Smith has a birth date, a hometown, an occupation, an education, certain kind of family dynamics, interests, hobbies, and so on. And that's why obviously on Facebook ads and other places where you can buy engagement, you're able to target based on these things. Now, each one of these things, components of this avatar is worth literally certain cents, and in some cases certain dollars. All of those things together, based on whether this person is interested in a home loan or interested in some sort of education or some sort of purchase, become worth different amounts to different people at different times for different reasons, for different products and services. So the startup, that's a very transactional example that I gave. But the startup still needs to see not only the value of the individual, but is this individual actually, keen on my product or service? Is this person an active monthly user? Is obviously a term that's often used. And if not, how do I acquire more of those people that are that? So again, another thing I would say is there's a tremendous amount of value in the user, the lead, the person, the human, and the data that you have around that. There's also, on the flip side, not a lot of value in the wrong engagement, the wrong user, the wrong person. So I think both those things kind of touch each other, and the startup needs to hold attention around how do I get as much data and use it well, use it by driving tons of value for the user, and at the same time not get caught up in vanity metrics where I'm chasing a ton of low quality engagement with the user.
It reminds me, something came to mind about a lawyer friend of ours who's one of the best in the world at what he does. He gets hired by big companies, sometimes when they get in trouble, sometimes when they want to stay out of trouble. He said at one point, people were always trying to call him in to redo their privacy policy online. And he just would laugh at them. He'd say, you don't need a privacy policy, let alone to update it. And they're like, what are you talking about? That's what it's all about. That's how we protect ourselves, all that stuff. He said, I'll tell you what you need to do. You need to stop using people's information against them. And then you don't need a privacy policy and you're not gonna have any lawsuits. And the company's just like, well, that's part of our business model. Like literally, maybe it's all the business model. And he was like, well, okay, that's your problem. The problem is not updating your privacy policy so you're better protected. And so we think that, when we actually got a friend of ours sent us a kind of like the sky is falling article about Silicon Valley. This person lives in Silicon Valley, sent us this article about the new European Union rules that they were considering about privacy, about, when you collect someone's data, you have to have a reason to be collecting it. My God, why would you have to have that?
The horror.
You can only have it for 2 years. Why? We want to have it forever. We don't know what we're going to use it for. We're just collecting data and it's upping our stock value. We don't know what we're going to use it for. We haven't figured out all the ways to sell this or to exploit the data. And like a few laws that seem, there's some things, I don't know much about it, so I'll admit I haven't gone into detail, but some things seem kind of reasonable. And when I saw it, I first was like, whoa, that's really going to change a lot for the current companies. But then I got really excited because I'm like, so companies that we're trying to build are actually going to flourish. Ones that want the user to have access over their own data, to be able to protect it or share it. And then we have to incentivize users to want to share their data. So right now, you don't have a choice. You sign up, there's a whole bunch of terms, no one reads them, they just click OK, and then they go on the platform, and then they get mad one day when the picture of their dog is used in an advertisement, and they find out that Instagram actually owns their photos. Yep. And they think that's insane. How's this possible? And it's like, well, remember that thing you signed up for free to use their platform and post your stuff? There's terms to that. It was an agreement that you made with them, and you just weren't aware of your own agreement. So it's kind of on buyer beware, caveat emptor when it comes to things like that. But there's also something really cool that we can harness here is when it comes to knowing your customer, online marketing companies know the value of that. That's something that the average company or charity or anyone could utilize well, which is who is our ideal client? Who's the person that we love working with the most? Who are our top 3 people that literally everyone in the company loves working with? And they pay us money or they give us the biggest donations, whatever it is. These people that we love, that's a customer avatar in traditional business speak. And the idea is like, what do we know about that person? Here's a list of all the things we know because we've been friends with them for, they've been a client for 10 years. Get really clear on who your people are that are giving you the most, they're your highest clients. And start to do what they're doing in the online marketing world, but just with your current clients, and start to list these things out in a spreadsheet and figure out. And then when you start to try to want to scale your solution, you can leverage some of those platforms that help you find your tribe. So ultimately, I don't think that it's bad. Some people get hung up on their information being used in certain ways. I feel like if you put your information into the public forum, I don't feel bad. I'm pretty transparent, and I'm pretty informal too. So I don't have a lot of privacy concerns, but I do respect privacy a lot, especially other people's. But when it comes to mine, I think, if I say this thing here, then maybe I should be willing to have anyone hear me say that. Maybe I should be okay with that information getting leaked. Maybe that would up the standard for integrity if if that started to happen. But for companies, I just wanted to say that they can actually take their ideal client, get used to that, and then go into the online world. Maybe they're not used to using online marketing to find new clients, but it's the easiest, best way that we've ever had to be able to find your tribe, the people that are exactly like what you're trying to find. And if you're trying to create something valuable, a product or a service, and get it to everyone in the world who wants or needs it, then that's the way that you do it quickest and for a few bucks per click. It's a very efficient way to get something to those people and to bring them into what you're doing. And then you have these little niche movements that start off. Someone likes something fairly niche, they go online, they start talking about how much they love it. Next thing you know, there's 100,000 people worldwide that are, do-it-yourself builders of these little 3D printers or something like that. Like a little community is formed globally. And they found their tribe, other people that are obsessed with this very strange, unique thing that they love, but they found other people like them. So there's a real way to harness that technology for good and for what it could be utilized for.
We're in the process right now of cleaning up the internet. The problem was we made an assumption that there was trust, and that allowed for a lot of untrustworthy players to enter. And one of the things I actually love to say is that for me personally, and I believe that this is the best structure for almost everything, and especially something like the internet, is that in public, I'm perfectly private, and in private, I'm perfectly public. Said a different way is that within a trusted environment, I am fully transparent. Within a non-trusted environment, I am not transparent at all. Mm-hmm. And so, some of the examples you just gave right there.
Can you give me an example of both?
Anything public, like with government or something with the newspaper, something that's private to me is no one's business. It's no one's right to report on it, reveal it. In my opinion, it's just not anything. My personally identifying information is not public. The public doesn't have the right to it. And then again in private, if I was say with my team with Exponential Ventures or wine tasting club that I have a lot of trust in, I have no secrets. I literally think that the team or the wine club are better because all of my fears and all my anxieties and all my dreams and hopes and so on are shared into it. So I have no problem myself sharing the deepest details, even the dark sides, the shadows, with groups that I have a lot of trust with. But the problem is that we have a bunch of players that are not, don't give us reason to trust them, but then demand everything from us, and then that's where the abuses come in.
Can I just mention my example on that? My example is a networking group that you're invited to where you think like, oh gosh, I'm gonna have to bring business cards, everyone's going to try to sell me stuff, there's going to be a bunch of maybe agents or brokers or people like that are kind of representing like entrepreneurs, but they really work for someone else and they're there to get sales, and then they're all over you trying to do that. And that's where I get very private. I don't want to give out my phone number, I don't want to give out my business cards, I don't want to tell them more than they need to know, and I'll be nice to them personally, but professionally I feel like they're trying to get something from me in that environment. And that's the way a lot of the internet feels. But in a private mastermind group or a friend group of entrepreneurs, there's rules around that stuff. What you can't share outside this group, like, you can't, just like when you go for counseling or something like that, there's privacy, there's confidentiality in these kind of settings. And then you go and you share everything. you're willing to share all your secrets, like about your business, like, here's how I did it. I want you to succeed too. Here you go. You're not going to hurt my business by being successful. But this might not be something that I would give to my competitors.
Even in even in these networking groups, we have an assumption of trust, and that is the first mistake. Do you have an explicit right to expect trust? So I would say, I completely understand your example. I would encourage everyone to demand proof that the trust is there in every single engagement. I mean this digitally, physically. I think so often we have the assumption that that's there, and it's just not. So, I mean, blockchain is quite literally solving the trust issue of the internet. We built the internet very humanly, I think optimistically, almost naively and childlike, thinking that trust would be just there. It's not. That's why the internet is wonderful and also very broken at this time. That's why there's so many bad actors and bad players out there. Now, if I go through, and then I can jump to, I think, probably the most practical advice, or some of the most practical advice that I can give to startups, but to really understand the kind of story arc or the genesis of the internet and where it's been, how I frame this in my mind and how I communicate it is that Web 1.0 was brochure, basically. It was just static website, typically one page, just broadcast the information. There was no way to really engage other than maybe click a hyperlink, opens the email, very, very, very childlike. Web 2.0 was the invention or innovation of basically dialogue, conversation. So it enabled forums and social networks and so on.
So 1.0 was unilateral, like billboards are blasting out publishing, and then Web 2.0 was
bidirectional. So it allowed for communication, which is amazing, which actually enabled extraordinary things on both positive and negative side.
Social elements.
One of the things, just to provide a little bit of context of why Web 3.0 is so critical, is that I believe we're literally looking at a fork in the road in terms of, are we going to stay sane? We have so much information coming at us, and the problem is it's not just a lot of information, it's mostly bad information. So Web 3.0 is going to be about curation. And the startups that will lead their spaces are the ones that are going to step up, put the user, which is a terrible name for a human, but that's the typical digital technology term, so we'll use it here. No, let's swap it out. We're going to put the human first. We're going to build this startup, this product, and manage everything internally from business objectives to product development to customer development based on, is the human getting the maximum amount of value? That's the start of the curation. And then obviously within the product and so on, and we could see it from, say, blogs all the way to really kind of niche products, really putting tribe members together. When people feel that the things that they value deeply are displayed, not just spoken, not just in the terms of service, not just on the landing page, not in the sales pitch, but every single engagement with that tribe member and that product or service and the other tribe members is basically the feeling, representing the mirroring back of that thing that you desire so much. That's the sort of level of curation that I'm talking about. And I think that as a consumer ourselves of social media, our mobile phones are becoming more and more a part of our lives. The people that are just broadcasting noise, like Web 1.0 brochure, like kind of just sloppy, mindless, cheap, inefficient, ineffective kind of noise, they're just not going to be able to sustain. They're just literally going to disappear. While the people that focus on high quality engagement with the right people at the right time about the right thing, that's what's going to capture the engagement of the people moving forward.
Right. So with that example of the business networking group, no curation, a public advertisement in the newspaper, anyone who wants to get more clients should come here. This date, we'll have some coffee and you can try to get more clients. No curation. Versus a private mastermind, a private group, which is all about curation. Literally, it's not even, in some of these groups, it's not even about who's on the stage. It's the person next to you is just as valuable as the person on the stage, because the person who runs the group made sure that anyone that came in was going to have a lot in common with the rest of the people. They were going to be able to really help each other. They're going to have things in common. They're going to have businesses that complement one another. They're going to have, so it's just a great experience. So you walk around in a curated community and it's a different experience. So we imagine the internet to be very similar, where putting out redundant content sharing or writing your own article on someone else's article that was written on another article that was written on a book that was researched by a professor. It's just like it's one piece of new information that's been added to the world's consciousness that now everyone's just been talking about over and over and over again in different ways. Whereas publishing, when the Gutenberg came about, the whole innovation of publishing was that you could take an idea and get it into everyone's consciousness and then build on it with another thing, instead of just recycling the same idea over and over in new ways. And that's where like value is created, and humanity starts to learn things and starts to create new possibilities. So I think with curation comes that new level of people providing unique value to a unique audience in a way that can be built on and move things forward, instead of just regurgitating redundant content.
Yeah, and people will pay for it. I'll give you an example. I'll say something that may sound crazy to people.
Well, that's the business case for curation, is that curation will always cost more and people are always willing to pay it.
I am 100 times more likely to pay $10,000 to go to an event than 50. And why? Because I have calculated very carefully in some cases that the $10,000 cost is actually an investment, and my return is, in most cases, many cases, probably $50,000 or more. Sometimes it's almost incalculable, the value that's received for that $10,000. At the same time, looking at the $50 events, in many cases there's zero value, so then I have to calculate a negative value, because the cost to go there, the opportunity cost, the time, the flight, and so on. So I think that what I find really exciting, and when you don't look at life and the economy and business as a zero sum, meaning that to get something I have to take it from someone else, if we're looking not from a scarcity mindset, but from an abundance mindset, we can literally create value that never existed before. So imagine that there's 1 million people all paying $50 to go to very generic, events that aren't highly curated, and instead take those 1 million people and imagine that they all are willing to pay $10,000 each to go to a very similar event that is just so curated for them, for exactly who they are, what they want to do, where they are, where they want to go. We're literally inventing, I think, this ability in this digitized era, the ability to so hyper curate everything that individuals can justify spending an enormous amount of money, because the value exchange is real.
Yeah.
At 1 million people at $50, how much value could you possibly exchange to a group that broad?
As a person running that $50 event, you don't really have to prove the $50 value. It's nominal. It's the price of a nice dinner or something like that, a really nice dinner. But yeah, with the $10,000 event, I've literally been to my first big expensive event I went to. I sat down at my table the first day and it had a piece of paper, and the guy came up on stage and he said, if you don't get, what was it? Each one, there was 10 lines that were blank, and each one was the cost of the event. And he said, if you don't get 10 times the amount of the cost of this event, then I will give you all your money back, and I didn't do my job. So I want you over the next 2 days to record these things that are worth the cost of this event, and to leave with 10 times that. And so that he knows his objective. He knows that people in the audience know how to calculate a return on investment. And they're thinking, if I can get 10 to 1 on my investment, what would I pay? That's like the idea with online marketing. If every time I spent $1, I got $3, how much money would I spend? And as you spend it, you get more ability to spend. So with a lot of businesses, I don't know if that's a plug for curated communities, but even if it was from $50 and you're a brand new business to pay $200 to have a group where there's someone actually, maybe someone in charge of the group. A lot of those groups don't have anyone in charge or anyone working part-time on it, let alone full-time. Whereas these high-end communities have teams of people making sure everyone's happy, making sure everyone has what they need. They're getting free gifts, they're getting things throughout the year. You can afford a lot. When you charge a little extra,
much, yeah.
You can afford the customer experience. You can afford to market and find those people from other countries that would love to come if they just knew about this.
Yeah, our problems are never going to go away as a species, as a society. We're just going to upgrade our problems, and I think that's what we're talking about. We're just talking about creating more value. So the world now is, 110,000 person events at $50 a piece. And the future, in my opinion, is 10,000 events at 100 people per event at $10,000 or whatever, $5,000, $2,000. And it will literally just allow those pockets, those, kind of micro groups of people just to think in ways that they never thought before, be supported in ways they've never been supported before, and create things that otherwise would be impossible to create. So I think, when we look at the social aspect and we start thinking about some of the technological advances, the exponential technologies that are available, the first kind of foundational, in the new world, the first foundational thing that we're going to have is a ledger to manage trust, that also manages transactions and so on. But the really cool thing about social is that in the very near future, social becomes trustworthy again, and that we are just going to get so much more value out of it. And that's obviously
if you can walk around your part of the internet, not having to worry about someone, all the threats that are out there, how would you interact on the internet? You'd act like you do in your living room, or like you do at a house party, but in a place that's typically not as safe. So then you could build really deep, meaningful connections in large places globally. Like, what would be the net effect of that? Is that for us, we want to have this happen with all the founders that we're working with. We want them to find each other and encourage each other and keep them going and solving these major problems in the world. And there might only be 3 people in the world trying to solve this problem. You need to find the other 2. That's the idea. And when you find the other 2, they might know another few. And each person brings their own network. And then you're able to build these communities exponentially.
Yeah, connecting these people, which I think tribe building might be the most important thing that our civilization does. And this enables that. And it could be even in competition, like XPRIZE is a great example of not just, synergistic, common, outcome-based, fueled by, say, a shared financial model, but literally just a competition where the prize is worth $10 million and XPRIZE has proven hundreds of millions of dollars worth of innovation. And that's in that moment. What about all the connections? What about people that really enjoyed each other's company and maybe create businesses together and create new products together? So the amount of value that's created by hyper-curation, I truly believe is incalculable, and it may be the greatest innovation in the history of our civilization, is just bringing people together on a common mission and supporting them in a way that would be impossible otherwise.
Nice. I want to talk about leveraged assets and staff on demand and a couple of the other ones. Let's give an example of a big company using that business practice, and then how a startup, the principle there that any startup can employ. So to start with leveraged assets, and maybe you can help me think about the startup. I'll talk about Uber, for instance. So they realized that there was assets that people own that sit unused for 97% of the time, and it was their car. It was sitting unused almost all the time. And they realized if we could leverage other people's cars, we don't need to own cars, we don't need to be a taxi service, we just need to provide an online platform that helps, now becomes a marketplace. Now it's people that have these dead assets that they want to make money off of, with people that need those assets and would love to pay money for it. And for instance, I take Uber a lot as a second car. And it's something that our family thinks, it's a little cheaper than getting a second car. And I actually like me and the drivers. I'm an extrovert. So I like jumping in different cars and kind of feeling really flexible. I can go anywhere I want, whenever I want. And so I enjoy it. The average startup, how can they use the same principle of leveraging assets, for their company?
Well, I think what underpins both those, and the staff on demand, both I think of as kind of like elastic resources, but the staff on demand thing I think specifically speaks to the gig economy, which a lot of people are really familiar with. Instead of being a classic employee, we kind of went through a phase of contracted employee, and now we're looking at even a gig employee where there's just a lot more ability for this service provider to provide a lot of services to a lot of different people. Now there's a dark side to it, or I would say we're in a position where we're still trying to figure out how to give people security. But the promise is a very, very tight alignment with proficiency, passion, and purpose. The gig economy allows an individual to be overpaid for a very kind of narrow service and engage many people to kind of de-risk that, which in many ways a job is the most risky proposition.
And what I think you're saying there is that the person in the gig economy that wants to take gigs, they realize I'm the asset that every company needs. They're trying to leverage people like me that can do a work piece at a time. And now I can have 30 clients instead of one boss. One boss that might go rogue one day or just let me go or doesn't think I'm doing a good enough job. I have 30 clients. I've hedged my risk. I'm getting paid a little more than I would have in my other job. One client treats me disrespectfully or some kind of weird harassment or something like that. You just say, I fire you. I'm not going to work for you anymore. I'm going to work for the other person that's nice. So it's a very interesting use of leveraged assets for the person to realize in that gig economy that they are the asset that everyone's trying to leverage.
Yeah, and that's kind of the human side. And the leveraged asset side is speaking more to me, as I see it, more like the share economy. And that's one of the most things I get most excited about. You've heard me say many times that waste is suffering. And if you really meditate on that, you will come to realize that waste is truly suffering. If I have a lawnmower and my neighbor doesn't, my neighbor has to go then do something that's terribly more inefficient, waste a ton of time at the expense of his family or her family. Or I have to live beside a home that's very not nice to look at. No one wants it. There's just lots of different ways of looking at it. The share economy, when we start to kind of commoditize access to things, and that's what Uber's begun to do. Some really cool maker spaces where instead of everyone owning a buzzsaw, 150 members now have access to a buzzsaw. I mean, this is extraordinary.
The best buzzsaw.
The best buzzsaw on the planet.
Instead of every person having horrible technology, we can all share and have the best.
And I think, and again, even if all of us are afflicted a little bit with a scarcity mindset, even ones that are committed to abundance mindset, but a lot of us just keep thinking like, how's this even possible? And while it is, and we're using kind of old thought processes, things like this can help. So if we only have to buy one buzzsaw across the entire community, then all of a sudden we can look at, and so let's say in that community there was 100 buzzsaws before. Now there's a lot more capital available to buy the best of everything, and now we just share it. So we can get to a beautiful place without changing even the economics. We just have to create cooperation and participation. And I think, as an example for me, we don't have to, but we rent out our place on Airbnb every time we go away. It's because of my commitment to the share economy. Because when I think about, our place happens to be a really nice place downtown, close to everything. When I think about that being empty, I'm actually abhorred by that. I get a little bit anxious because why am I leaving this beautiful place with access to lots of family things and events and so on? I'm closing the lights and I'm leaving it empty, and it bothers me. So I think that stat about the cars, 97% of cars sit idle in their lifetime. We are waking up to that, and entrepreneurs are seeing that it is. So here's my point. I'm trying to give a few examples because it is literally everywhere.
It's everywhere.
It is everywhere that things are mostly, because that's not our experience. When we walk into a place, a room, it becomes animated. Well, most rooms weren't, most things weren't, most tools. Think about the tools in your toolbox, the rooms in your house that you go into infrequently. Those things are dormant until someone walks in. So how many things in the world are sitting there with no one touching them? And you as a startup, if you can figure out a way, like Uber did.
You're taking a waste product and you're turning it into something extremely valuable.
Yeah,
and there's a surplus of the waste. So it's like you want to produce a good, all of a sudden you find this material that everyone's throwing out that is the best material for your product. It's a great find for an opportunist or an entrepreneur just to be like, wow, there's a good opportunity there. So I wanted to get into that. But we do have to wrap it up a little bit. We've gone through a few things. We could obviously talk about this forever.
All day.
So I propose we take a quick break, get a little snack, and then we come back and get into the practical. How do you build exponential levers into a startup? How does the average founder use these crazy principles that big organizations are using in their startup?
Awesome.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We take every listener to this podcast very seriously, and we'd love to keep in touch with you directly. So please subscribe to our Scaling Impact community by subscribing to our email list at exv.ai/podcast. That's exv.ai/podcast.